Hey everybody, here we have the Mishimoto charge pipes for the BMW S55 engine. So that's your F8X BMW M2 competition, M3 and M4. And the reason why I actually bought these is because I thought I had broken my stock charge pipe at the coupler, or the plastic weld where the main pipe body meets the coupler. For better or worse, that ended up not being the case. But anyhow, with these all aluminum ones from Mishimoto, I won't have to worry about that anymore. Now, before I start talking about the actual product itself, one of the things that kind of stood out to me a little bit was how it was all packaged. I mean, you can see there's this nice heavy-duty box that this all came in, but in addition to that, each one of these pipes came in a large bubble-wrapped bag, and the ends of the bags were tucked nicely inside of the ends of the tube. So, you know, that's a little attention to detail there. You don't see that often. And then on top of that, each one of those came inside another Mishimoto bag. So there was plenty of packaging, plenty of protection, and it was just really nice to see that level of refinement. Looking at the pipes themselves, well, you know, they're very lightweight because they are all aluminum, and they have this nice, you know, matte black finish. So they'll blend in nicely if you're, you know, not looking for a flashy or you're just looking for a stock look. Some of the other hardware this came with is, you can see it came with 2 silicone couplers to go from the pipes to the intercooler, and they also came with 4 hose clamps. These are for 50 to 70 millimeters, so that is the inner diameter of these hose clamps is adjustable between 50 and 70 millimeters, the exact same as the stock hose clamps on the stock charge pipes and intercooler. One thing that's a bit unique about these charge pipes, in particular this one over here, is you can see it's made from 3 separate sections, right? And if we look at this center section, you can see that it's necked down in diameter here. It flattens out. And if we look at it from this side, you can see it bowed out here. So the internal volume should stay the same. But what Mishimoto has done here is they've followed kind of the stock pattern of the charge pipes that BMW provides, where this is a little bit slimmer in order to be able to fit all the other intake piping that goes around these things. So that's a nice detail there. And you know, if you were to look inside here, you can see that things don't align, you know, super perfectly. But where they do align is they align on this outermost edge. So you know, it's a smooth transition from this pipe over here going to this top edge on the outside radius of the bend. Also, each one of these pipes has this little bung right here for methanol injection, but you can see that it's not finished. They provide you a little pilot hole, but if you are going to be installing, you know, methanol, you will need to drill this out and finish it. And then looking at the bottom, at the coupler section where this is going to go up against the turbo here, one of the common complaints about this charge pipe set is that this weld right here protrudes a little bit over the bolt hole area, and so it can restrict access to the E10 screw or bolt that goes in there. So, you know, when I put this in, I'll have to see how much of a hindrance that actually is or not. Okay, now that we are in the hood, we're going to start by removing these side panels. So we're going to take our 10 millimeter and we're going to turn all of these 3 10 millimeter locks 90 degrees to unlock them. I'm going to do that counterclockwise. Next, we can take our pry tool to pull up the expanding plastic rivet over on the side. And right, if we look at these guys, it has the center post, which we have to pull up first, and then you can go ahead and take your trim or pry tool and get under the main flange to remove the rest of it. And then out comes this cover. Next, we're going to remove all of the 13 millimeter bolts on the carbon brace. So we have 2 up here, and then we have a couple more in the back. If you have an M3, M4, you may have another one at the very end here. I only have 2 on this M2. Next, go ahead and take your 10 millimeter and remove this little bolt, which holds the carbon brace to this coolant tank. Then we can go ahead and lift up this little flap over here, take this arm of the carbon brace out, and slide it out of the other side to remove it. Next, let's move over to the intake, and specifically the MAF sensor. So we'll go ahead and zoom in here, and we're going to disconnect this. And the way you can do that is you can either press down on this side of the lever to pull it out, or you can try and take a pick tool and pry up on the inside side. But anyways, I'm just going to press down over here and pull that out. Then we can use a 6mm to undo the hose clamp here. And that will allow us to pull this intake pipe over here off of the intake box. And be careful for the worm drive clamp here. You don't want this to accidentally fall down into the engine bay. Next, we're going to remove the stock air box, and you can kind of see it, but over in this upper left-hand corner, there's a support on the airbox that plugs into a rubber gasket down there, and likewise over on this lower right-hand corner, there's another one. So we're going to have to pull up in each of these areas to release the airbox before we can take it out. Once again, be careful that this worm drive clamp doesn't accidentally fall down. We'll go ahead and pull up this side first. That came up. While I've got this here, let's go ahead and take the worm drive clamp out and make sure that it's safe. And then we can finish pulling up the airbox. Now we can access this other 6mm screw on the worm drive clamp, so we'll go ahead and undo that one as well. And then that will let us take out this upper intake pipe piece, and once again grab this worm drive clamp, make sure it doesn't fall down. For this last intake tube, we have one more 10mm bolt to take out, so go ahead and release that. And then that will let us just simply pluck this tube right out. Now let's go ahead and take off the engine cover. There are 4 pegs holding this guy on. We'll pull the one back here. And if we turn this around, you can see there are the 4 pegs there, right? 1, 2, 3, and 4. Next, we'll want to release the charge pipes from the intercooler, so we'll have to take our 6mm again and get on these worm drive clamps, undo those. Next, let's disconnect this conduit from this clip on the charge pipe. So we got to pull this out. There we go. Another thing to take note of is the charge pipes do have mounts going to the engine, right? This one is right here, this one is over here. So just be aware that you'll be pulling up or pulling out this way on these guys when you remove the charge pipes. Now we can go ahead and pull the charge pipes off of the intercooler. Now, one thing I want to point out right now, look how much play the charge pipe has, right? It can rock this far, right? And the rear one can rock a little bit less right now because it's being constrained by another hose over here. But this one also has a lot of movement to it. And this is by design. If we look at the bottom of the charge pipe and that single bolt that secures it, you can see that this charge pipe is allowed to rock, and that bolt, the flange on that bolt, doesn't actually sit against the flat section of the charge pipe. So this bolt is fastened all the way, and once I take that bolt out, I'll show you. But the design is such to allow this amount of play. So if you're seeing this play in your charge pipe, you think, oh my gosh, I've broken something. This is actually what made me think I had broken it. Well, you probably haven't, and it's actually designed to be allowed to articulate this much. So now let's go ahead and take our E10 and go ahead and unscrew this bolt holding the charge pipe. And once again, be careful not to drop that down into the engine bay. Then we can pull the first charge pipe up and out. Next, let's do the same and remove that E10 bolt from the rear charge pipe. Then we can pull the last charge pipe up and out. Alright, from the stock charge pipes, we will need to harvest this O-ring in here. So go ahead and use a pick tool and be very gentle. We don't want to damage this O-ring at all, since this is what's providing all of the sealing. And then we're going to transfer that into the Mishimoto lower coupler section. Make sure that gets nicely in the groove. So let's take a look at the silicone couplers that BMW and Mishimoto use. So I have the stock charge pipe in my left hand, right? This also has the stock coupler, and my right hand is the ones that Mishimoto includes. You can see the Mishimoto ones are longer, and the Mishimoto ones have some type of like fabric tape on the outside. If we look at the cross sections here, we can see that the Mishimoto one it has a thinner cross section overall, so this wall is thinner than the stock one. But one thing we do notice is there are many more plies of fabric or thread reinforcement in the Mishimoto compared to stock. Stock has what looks like just one single ply around this entire thing, versus the Mishimoto has 3 plies or 3 individual layers of fabric embedded within it. And also, you know, I tried putting this over the Mishimoto charge pipe. It does fit. However, the ones that Mishimoto includes have a tighter fit, so probably better to stick with the ones that Mishimoto uses rather than harvest the ones from the stock charge pipe. One thing I will harvest from the stock charge pipe, however, are the hose clamps. And the reason why is these hose clamps have this additional spring right here that the ones included in the Mishimoto kit don't have. And what this does is this ensures the proper amount of tension is on the hose clamp no matter what the temperature is. So right, you know, the engine bay temperatures can vary a great deal. You know, when let's say you go into your car in the morning, it's cold, right? You know, this may be at ambient temperature, which could be, you know, below freezing. And then obviously when this gets up to temperature, it can be very hot. So having these Norma style, and I say Norma style because it says the company that makes them is Norma. It says in the band right here. I don't know if you can see that very well. But anyhow, the company's Norma. You can also buy these from Norma. This one, let's see, has markings on the inside. It looks like the part number might be 82050R, R51. So if you wanted to buy that, you could. And just like the Mishimoto ones, right, this has a 50 to 70 millimeter inner diameter adjustment range. And if you look right here on the inside of the band, you can see kind of an adhesive mark. That's because BMW actually kind of glues these to the silicone couplers so they don't, you know, fall off or, you know, get lost in the engine bay after you take them off. So you will have to like pull that glue apart to take this off. Next, let's take a look at the bolt that secures the charge pipe. And, you know, as I was telling you before, this bolt is designed to allow the charge pipe to wiggle back and forth and have play, and you can see that because this bottom flange is what will bottom out against the turbo mount, and then this upper flange is just to secure the charge pipe from popping up and off, but it stands off from the charge pipe, so it allows it to wiggle. So I'm going to start with the rearmost pipe, which is the shorter one without the flat section, and I'm going to take the Mishimoto coupler. Go ahead and just get that on there. I'm going to slide that back pretty far to give myself enough clearance over here. You know, once we get this in place, we can always move this coupler forward. So another thing we'll need to do before we drop the charge pipe in is we'll have to take, you know, the bolt that secures it, and we'll want to put this through to start and have this just sitting here as we lower the pipe. And the reason why is, you know, I was talking before about how this weld is a little bit large and protrudes over the mount area. Well, if you put this charge pipe in and you try and drop the bolt, you can see that, you know, it's not going to go in straight. And so what that means is the bottom tip of this bolt is not going to go into the turbo very easily. So in order to get this to line up straight, we have to start with it already in here. Once again, right, if you try and drop it in here, then that tip, you can see where it's protruding on the inside edge of this hole, and it's not going centered enough to where it can line up with the turbo. So it's just easier to just put this in to start. So then now we'll go ahead and drop in this charge pipe. Get that aligned, and we can get this over and get the bolt started. Then let's just go ahead and screw in this bolt a little bit by hand, make sure it's catching the threads on the turbo. And it's easier to get this bolt started without fully seating the charge pipe against the turbo. So as you can see, I've got this standing off a bit, and I'm going to just by hand get this bolt started, making sure it's catching the threads of the turbo. It is. And then go ahead and just slowly lower the charge pipe as you tighten this bolt. And then once again, because of this weld protrusion, we're not going to be able to fit an E10 socket in there. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to be using an 8mm wrench to tighten that E10 down, and you can see the 8mm slides over just like so, and we'll tighten it. I don't think you're going to be able to fit the closed end of an 8mm around that E10 in order to screw it down. So here you can see I'm using my 8mm wrench. I'm using it to tighten this E10 bolt, and I'm having to flip the wrench head over each turn so I can have enough swing clearance for the tool. Definitely not the easiest thing, but you know what, we're getting there. So really, you know, do as much of this by hand, tightening it as much by hand, and only use the wrench when you really have to, because yeah, this is a little bit of a pain. And then you don't have to worry too much about the torque spec of this bolt. If you are curious, it is 10 Newton meters, or about 7.4 foot-pounds. But you know, just getting this hand tight, snug, you know, with the wrench, that will be good enough. Now we can go ahead and slide those Norma hose clamps over the coupler, and you'll notice that I don't have very much room between the coupler and the intercooler, and this, you know, the Mishimoto pipe is not pulling as far back as the stock pipe did, and that's the reason why that is because this pipe doesn't have that flat section, you know, where it necks down and becomes thinner in the midsection, and that flat section on the stock pipe is designed like that to allow this pipe to pull further off of the intercooler. So after I move this silicone sleeve over the intercooler and this pipe, you know, I'm not going to be able to disconnect it without sliding this sleeve all the way back to where this bung is. And at least for me, you know, someone who's never going to use methanol, this bung is actually more of a hindrance than it is helpful, because if this wasn't here, then I could just slide the sleeve all the way back anytime I need to disconnect this from the intercooler. But instead, I'm going to have to fight this a little bit, it looks like. So while I have the most working space here, because I don't have the forward charge pipe on, I think I'm going to use this opportunity to push the silicone coupler up and over onto the intercooler. And I'll go ahead and move the hose clamps into place, and then tighten up the hose clamps with my 6mm. And then the torque spec for these is 3 Newton meters. Now let's prep the forward charge pipe. So, you know, I've got my silicone coupler on, moved all the way back as far as I can go. I've got my O-ring that was harvested from the stock charge pipe, and you can see here that I've already inserted the E10 bolt into the receptacle here, so it can be aligned properly when I'm putting it into the turbo. So now I can go ahead and drop this into place. And once again, I'm going to, you know, just screw this E10 bolt in by hand as much as I can, and I have not pressed the charge pipe all the way down on the turbo yet. I'm going to do that as this bolt goes further down by hand, since, well, you know, you can't fit a E10 socket on it anymore. And then to finish it off, once again, we'll have to use that 8mm open-ended wrench, but luckily this one has a lot more swing room over here, so you don't have to keep flipping that around. And then, you know, just get this hand tight snug. Don't torque it down too ridiculously tight, because we don't want to bend any of the ends of the e-torque star in case, let's say, you go back to stock charge pipes later and you can use your e-torques on there. Now, unlike the rear charge pipe, which you know, has very little clearance before it hits the heat shield over here, the front one has lots of room. So, you know, you can pull this very far away from the intercooler inlet. So no problem, you know, giving yourself enough room to slide the hose clamps over. And once again, I harvested the normal ones from the stock charge pipe. And then once again, I'm going to go ahead and push this charge pipe as close as I can to the inlet of the intercooler, because I'm finding that's the best way, where the pipe and the inlet align, and what makes it the easiest to get the silicone coupler over from the charge pipe to the inlet. Now we can slide our Norma hose clamps into position and then go ahead and tighten them down. And then finish them off to 3 Newton meters again. Now let's replace the lower intake pipe. So we'll just maneuver this into place over the inlet and kind of get the mount a little bit aligned with the receptacle over on the engine. And we're gonna go ahead and just wiggle this into place. You can also twist it side by side till it's all the way down. Then we can go ahead and replace the 10mm bolt at the top that holds it in place. And then this bolt gets torqued to 8 Newton meters, 6 foot-pounds, or 71 inch-pounds. Next, we'll replace the mid-air pipe section on there. And don't forget to get the hose clamp for it. I'm going to go ahead and put that on now. And then you can go ahead and just pop that on there. And then next what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the stock airbox and just kind of mock it up, put it, where it would sit like so that I can see where this outlet is of it. And I can rotate this pipe accordingly such that it'll naturally line up. Plus, I'm not going to be able to rotate this once I fasten the hose clamp down there. So now that this pipe is in the proper position, I can go ahead and tighten up that hose clamp, and then just like the other hose clamps, finish it off to 3 Newton meters. Now we can go ahead and put the airbox back, but before we do, let's take a look at how it mounts. So we have these pegs, on these kind of opposite diagonal corners, and on the bottom we also have this bumper which can kind of rotate, but importantly it has this clip, and this clip is supposed to slot on this ridge right here, this pinch weld of the metal. So because this can rotate, go ahead and orient it the way it needs to be before you go ahead and drop this assembly in. Lastly, we have this side of it, which kind of locks in. Right here are the tabs that the fingers kind of grab around, and this slots into the intake right here. Now that part slides in pretty easily, but it's just something to keep note of. So I'm going to go ahead, place the airbox roughly where it needs to be, look at that bumper, make sure that that clip is on this outside, and that it stays there, because if I hold it like this, it'll rotate away from where it needs to be, and then I can go ahead and drop the airbox in. One more thing we'll want to do before we put the airbox in is we'll want to take that last hose clamp and just put this around the pipe here. Once again, make sure that it doesn't fall off and down deep into the engine bay. Now we can go ahead and take the airbox, get it lined up, make sure that bottom clip is oriented in the right direction. Go ahead and slowly drop this thing down into place. Get this front corner over here underneath the hoses it needs to be. I'm gonna once again grab this spinny part underneath the bumper, make sure it's aligned. And once everything is aligned, okay, I can feel this is on that ridge now. Everything's aligned. I'm going to go ahead and push down. Make sure those 2 pegs on these diagonal corners are in their slots. Make sure that the intake portion is over the intake tube. And then lastly, I can go ahead and slide this mid pipe over the intake box. Then I can go ahead and tighten this hose clamp. Once again, 3 Newton meters. And then plug in the MAF sensor. Now let's go ahead and put the engine cover back on. So once again, you have the various posts, the 4 posts that it sits on. Go ahead and get those all aligned. And then we can go ahead and slide our carbon brace back into position. So I'm sliding it through that gasket on the right side, lifting up this flap or gasket on the left. Then we can get all of our bolts started by hand. So the short ones go in front and the longer ones in the rear. Then we can go ahead and tighten them down, and BMW says tighten the front ones first, then the middle ones, and then lastly the rear ones. And final torque spec for all of these is going to be 28 Newton meters or 21 foot-pounds. And then don't forget the 10 millimeter bolt that holds the expansion tank to the carbon brace. And then this one just needs to be hand tight, lightly snug. Now make sure your gaskets are all back into place properly, and we can go ahead and take our side covers, go ahead and insert those into the centerpiece, then rock them down into position. And then we can lock them into place with our 10 millimeter and quarter turn to the clockwise direction. And then lastly, we have our plastic expanding rivet, which secures it in the side. So the Mishimoto charge pipes are now in the car. They fit really well. There's no issues with the engine cover or anything like that. One thing I did wish that they had was a clip to secure that corrugated conduit that we had to release from this clip on the forward charge pipe. But aside from that, they should be solid and won't have to worry about this cracking or anything like that in the future.